For 1,000 years, the legends have it that this could not be broken. Experts said it is not possible. Doctors and physicians said it is humanly insurmountable. Someone would die if they broke this. Yet in 1954, Roger Bannister broke the record for the mile and ran it in under 4 minutes, something thought to be impossible. The funny thing is, after he broke this, many people broke this after, hundreds and hundreds of people. In fact, today, it's kind of a routine thing for some people, not for me, but for some people, to run a mile in under 4 minutes. Roger ran to escape a life of poverty and violence. It was his purpose. It was his passion. And I love this story because I think we can learn lots from it, but especially 2 things. One, sometimes people need someone to show them that something that's impossible really isn't impossible. And sometimes people need a purpose or a passion that drives them to look those naysayers in the face and say, there is no such thing as can't. Have any of you encountered something like that in your life, where someone said it can't be done, it's not possible? Hold on to that, because it may just be the planting of your purpose. In the 1970s, when my amazing sister was brought into the world to my wonderful parents, the physician said to them, your daughter has severe intellectual and developmental disabilities. He recommended institutional care and that my parents move forward with their lives. You cannot raise a child with this level of need in a community, he said. My parents said, yes, we can. There is no such thing as can't. In Rochester, New York, across the lake from where we were living at the time, there was a group of parents facing the very same challenges with their loved ones. See, they rejected the idea that institutional care was okay. This was the reality that they were saying no to. It's not acceptable. And instead of just saying, no, it's not acceptable, but letting it be, they started to dig in and figure out, how did institutional care come to be? They looked at the regulations, the quality assurance structure, the reimbursement structure, and what they started to do as parents who loved their children and wanted something different was reimagine how they could operationalize something for the people who they loved. 40 years later, the organization they founded, Heritage Christian Services, serves my sister in a community. She may just be your neighbor. She lives in Webster, New York, the place where life is worth living. Any of you? Certainly worth living for her. She has a more active social life than I suspect most of us in this room. So they have proved there is nothing that is insurmountable. Growing up with this, you can imagine, was quite an incredible experience for me. I really learned that there's nothing that people can't do when they come together. And that seed of there's no such thing as can't, Rebecca, was planted in me. This would take shape years later in my work in nursing homes. I work in a nursing home. Usually when I tell people that, they kind of go, oh, don't know how you do that. Well, I know how I do it. But here's what, the truth, is it makes me a little bit uncomfortable too. Want to know why? Because institutional care still lives today. Even in the last 40 years, long-term care hasn't come near far enough to get rid of those medicalized principles that institutions exonerate to people. So here's what institutions do, right? They take people with the highest level of need, they put them all together, cohorted, and then they strip them from their natural connections, their family, their friends, their informal community support, their faith support. They separate them. And then they understaff so that it's barely able to execute the basic care needs of human beings, never less the social or spiritual needs of these people. I remember starting in my first job in 2008, or 2001. It was a nursing home, and I met someone named Anthony. I was a social worker at the time, and if you can believe it, a social worker supporting 75 elders in this home. It was a great home with great people who worked there, please be assured. But I want to tell you that when I met Anthony, he had just had a stroke and he couldn't feed himself. He was too embarrassed to come out of his room and have meals with other people. And I was the social worker trying to figure out how can I help this man get a little bit more acclimated to his community, his new community. After several failed attempts, I said, you know what, Rebecca? Just go in and have breakfast with him. So I took my oatmeal and my tea, I brought his food in, and I sat down and I said, Anthony, can we eat breakfast together? As I helped him eat and I ate myself, we talked about life, I was expecting my first baby at the time, and I shared with him how my husband, my patient husband, was procrastinating painting the nursery, something I'm sure nobody can relate to. He laughed and one-upped me. He said, when I found out we were pregnant from my wife, not only did she ask me to paint a nursery for her, Rebecca, but she asked me to construct her an entirely new home. She wanted it done in 4 weeks' time. We lamented the journey of marriage and expecting babies, and it was just a normal talk while we had breakfast together. And at the end, he looked at me and he said, thank you. And I kind of said, okay, for what? For making me feel like a human again, he said. Here I am, a social worker supporting 75 people, and I made him feel human again by having breakfast with him. But here's the thing. The direct care staff, incredible direct care staff, CNAs and nurses, they were taking care of 8 to 10 people, sometimes often more. I had 75 people on my caseload. Breakfast like that was a luxury, but I knew in my gut breakfast like that was a necessity. I can distinctly remember going, this system is so broken, it is insurmountable. And a still small voice saying, but there's no such thing as can't. When I started in my next job, we had an opportunity to redefine what nursing homes look like. And I wanted to take a minute to figure out, why is there such a big challenge? And the big challenge really starts with staffing. Just as I described, 1 social worker, 75 people, 8 to 10 per direct care staff. But here's the bigger challenge we have ahead of us, is even though that's inadequate in itself, the challenge is only gonna grow. There's 1.2 million people in this nation who need skilled level of care right now, 1.2. So if you would just take a minute, I wanna make this real for you all. Look next to you. Hello. One of the 2 of you is gonna need nursing home care at some point in your life. I can see everybody going, yep, it's them. You never know. 3 out of 4 of you, that's 75% of you all in this audience, will need nursing home level of care for someone that you love. Care needs do not discriminate. So we have to figure out a way to do this differently. But the challenge is the direct care staff aren't there. So here's the 1.2 million people who need care. And in the blue bar on the left, what you see is the amount of staff that we need to basically take care of those people in a traditional model of long-term care. The problem is, on the red, right next to it, you can see how many staff we actually have employed today. This issue goes across industry lines into my sister's work, across our nation for anyone who's looking for direct care. We have to start thinking about this different, because in 5, 10, 15 years, our population that needs skilled nursing care is going to double. That means 2.7 million people will need skilled level of care. It doesn't matter if you think you can stay home. That's not going to work because it's shown that it hasn't worked for all people. So at some point, some people will need it. 2.7 million people. Yet the workforce, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, is staying effectively the same. That is a startling statistic, friends, and we have to figure something out. So what do we do? What do? I run a nursing home. Do I just stop and go, well, it is what it is? We'll let them deal with it when they get there. That's us. We're going to have to deal with it. Or do we really step back and be inspired by those who've gone before us and say, no, I think we can do something else. And that's what I'm here to share with you today, is that we can do something else. And I have, and it's been successful, and I want to keep doing it. In 2012, we opened in Penfield, New York, the first home-style nursing home planted right into a community. If you drove by it, you wouldn't know it was a nursing home. We really sat down as a staff and figured out, how can we do this in a different way? And what we realized is that for every direct care staff, let's say we have 15 direct care staff, we had around 6 or 7 indirect employees, social workers, activities staff, dietitians, dining support staff, environmental services, quality assurance, clerical teams, 7 indirect staff to 15 direct care staff. And I looked at my team and I said, guys, this is going to be hard, because we're going to have to figure out a way to put those resources from indirect care into a direct care workforce. I call those indirect staff, by the way, experience bridgers, because the reason that they're there for a big part is because there's not adequate direct care staff. There's not enough numbers of them to do what we need them to do. And then they're not trained well enough to be compliant, so we have to add in all these fillers. And then the last reason that we need those experience gaps is because we can't compensate or haven't been able to compensate direct care staff in a way that makes it a career. So it's a constant churn of people who are burning out and fizzling out and moving through. In 2012, we opened with a revelatory staffing model and physical model in which there are adequate staff and they are adequately trained and they are compensated in a way that rivals entry-level professional careers so that they can continue to grow in their skill set and really make a difference in a system. This model has been incredibly successful. 100% satisfaction from the elders and staff and family members who are a part of it for the last 5 years. Less than 1% staffing turnover in 5 years' time in an industry where 30 to 40% turnover doesn't make us balk at all. The best experience has been the quality assurance. Because this is such a new model and we had to figure out, could it be compliant? Could this really work in an industry more regulated than nuclear power? In 7 surveys by the state and federal government, this is a new model, so it's heavily scrutinized, it has been near perfect, including 2 weeks ago where they had an exemplar state recertification survey yet again. The second big challenge that we had to tackle was, can I convince that indirect staff that this is okay? Imagine, you go to school to be a social worker expecting a traditional 75-person caseload, and what this administrator is saying is that you need to teach the people who take care of those elders every single day how to make sure they are doing all the things that you're there to support. It's a bit of a paradigm shift, but if you look at our direct care numbers, it's hard to convince somebody that we don't have to do something different. There were some great successes at this story, but just remember Anthony, who I introduced you to when I first started in my nursing home career. Breakfast like I had with Anthony in this model happens every single day, 7 days a week, with every single elder, but it's not done by a social worker. It's done by the direct care staff who supports all of Anthony's needs, from spiritual needs to social needs to physical care needs to meal needs. It's pretty remarkable. Another great example of success in this model comes from my friend Lou. Lou moved in after he had lost both of his legs. And he was out with his amazing universal work staff foraging for cardoons in the woods behind the home. Any of you guys know what cardoons are? Not too many Italians in the area? Okay. So apparently they grow in the wild. They were foraging for them in the woods. And when they brought them in to fry them, because I guess that's what you do with cardoons, while they were out talking, he had mentioned how much he missed hunting. And she came in and she said, you know, Lou, I think we could figure out a way to get you out hunting again. Kind of looked down at his chair and he was like, really? And she goes, well, there's no such thing as can't. Really well trained this girl was. So long story short, he got to the field where he was typically hunting into a tree stand where he was familiar with, and doesn't a 5-point flashy buck walk right by going, shoot me, Lou, shoot me. And sure enough, he did. He then proceeded to bring that buck home to his home in Penfield, New York, upstate New York, and he asked to hang it in the garage to dress it out. I don't know if anyone knows what that means, but the people in the house said absolutely not. What they finally decided on was that they would get it processed externally and make venison sausage together and celebrate Lou's victory over venison sausage. I would be hard-pressed to find a traditional nursing home that would have a story like that in its history. I've got ages of them. But here's my challenge. I also run a big building on Highland Avenue where 470 people live, and most of the time that's where I spend my life. We needed to do something different there too. I couldn't reconcile the dichotomy of care. So here we had this home with 475 people in it and an amazing staff struggling to convert to something different. But what we've done in the last 3 years with this incredible team is start to emulate the model that we've seen in Penfield. No longer is this one home. This is 20 homes for elders, staffed in the same universal work model with the same well-staffed, well-trained, and well-compensated direct care worker that we need. Again, 7 homes have been open for the last 2 years. The results are just what you would expect: improved quality, improved satisfaction, and improved staff retention. We're talking about redefining a workforce here, and I want to give you some tips about doing something insurmountable so that you too can remember there's no such thing as can't in your life. The first thing that you need to do, stop commiserating. It is so easy to talk about how bad the system is, or how unjust life is, or how broken things are. But you know what? It really doesn't take us anywhere. So instead of commiserating and saying, well, it's just the way it is, start saying it's the way it is now, and I'm going to work to make it different in the future. Collaborate. This community is so rich in academia, in collegial relationships, in organizations like here who people are really trying to do something different together. You can't tackle the insurmountable on your own. Don't even try. Finally, probably most importantly, have some courage. There's a lot of naysayers out there, especially when you're trying to do something different. People are going, you're going to die if you run faster than a 4-minute mile. And kind of, I might. So, right? Just being honest. But seriously, have some courage. Through this workforce conversion at St. John's, I can assure you, I have been effective and I have been woefully ineffective. I have been loved and I have been painfully loathed. I have been incredibly proud of our accomplishments, and yet I am desperate for faster transition because we cannot continue to provide institutional care for people who need real life support in a home. So as we're talking about reimagining this nursing home, I want you to take heart, and if you're curious about how you might be able to collaborate, please talk with me. There's always room for more, right? But I want you to take some solace in the fact that when one, or the person, you, or the person to your right needs a nursing home care, or someone in your family needs that level of care, that you just might be able to go to another home if your own home might work. And you'll be able to do that with a staff that's rewarded with the ability and the resources and the compensation that they deserve to take full care of you in your life. And then finally, I just want to celebrate and give gratitude to those who've given purpose and clarity in my life, including Tony, Anthony, and Lou, and of course my incredible Sissy. And as you depart from here today, I wish you great clarity in your purpose so that you too can look those naysayers in the face and say, there's no such thing as can't. Thank you.